There is a creature sitting in a tank at the Toba Aquarium in Japan. His keeper walks over, lowers a fresh mackerel into the water, and waits. The isopod looks at it, moves toward it, even rubs its face against the fish, and then it turns around and walks away. The keeper tries again the next day. Nothing. He tries squid tentacles, sori, different temperatures, different tank conditions. Nothing. He calls in scientists. He invites photographers to document the feedings so the public can watch. Still nothing. This goes on for a year, then 2 years, then 3, then 4, then 5. 1,868 days without a single bite of food. And for most of that time, the creature appears completely healthy. When it finally died, a dissection found no obvious reason for the refusal. No disease, no blockage. No explanation. The animal had simply decided not to eat, and it survived longer without food than most people could comprehend. This is the giant isopod, and that story is only the beginning of what makes it extraordinary. Before we go any deeper into what this animal can do, we need to spend a moment on what it actually is, because the gap between what people picture when they hear deep-sea crustacean and what the giant isopod actually looks like is genuinely surprising. The scientific name is Bathynomus giganteus. The genus name Bathynomus translates literally from Greek as deep dweller, which is about as accurate as a name can get. It belongs to the order Isopoda, the same group that includes the tiny pillbugs and roly-polies you might find under a rock in your garden or along a forest trail. Those land versions are usually less than 2 centimeters long. The giant isopod can reach 50 centimeters. That is roughly the length of a human elbow to fingertip. It was first formally described in 1879 by a French zoologist named Alphonse Milne Edwards, who identified a specimen hauled up from the Gulf of Mexico. At the time, the scientific community still held a widespread belief that life could not exist at great ocean depths. A creature the size of a dinner plate, pulled from hundreds of meters down, was a genuinely shocking discovery. There are approximately 20 known species within the genus Bathynomus, and scientists divide them loosely into giant species, which tend to run between 8 and 15 centimeters, and supergiant species, which run between 17 and 50 centimeters. The most studied and most famous of them is Bathynomus giganteus, which falls into the supergiant category and lives in the cold, deep waters of the western Atlantic, including the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean. In terms of appearance, most people describe their first reaction to seeing a giant isopod as somewhere between fascination and unease. The body is wide, flat, and segmented, protected by overlapping armored plates. The eyes are large, pale, and compound. The whole animal moves with the slow, deliberate, slightly mechanical quality of something that has never needed to rush. That unhurried quality, it turns out, is not a personality trait, it is a survival system. And to understand how that system works, you need to understand where this animal actually lives. The deep sea is not simply dark water, it is one of the most extreme environments on the planet, and understanding its conditions explains almost everything about this animal. Giant isopods are found at depths ranging from around 170 meters down to approximately 2,140 meters below the surface. That puts the vast majority of them in what oceanographers call the bathyal zone, a region of the ocean defined by near-freezing temperatures, crushing hydrostatic pressure, and a complete or near-complete absence of sunlight. Over 80% of Bathynomus giganteus individuals have been found at depths between 365 and 730 meters, deep enough that no meaningful light penetrates at all. At these depths, photosynthesis is impossible. That means no plants, no algae, no primary producers of any kind growing on the ocean bottom. The food that reaches the floor arrives almost entirely from above, carried down by what marine biologists call marine snow, a steady drift of decomposing organic particles, dead plankton, fish waste, and fragments of organisms from the sunlit waters far overhead. This is a world of almost unimaginable scarcity. Imagine living somewhere where the only food source shows up unpredictably, sometimes after weeks of nothing, and sometimes in a sudden overwhelming quantity with no warning either way. That is the feeding reality for an organism on the deep sea floor. Meals arrive infrequently, and when a large marine animal dies at the surface and its carcass eventually sinks to the bottom, it becomes one of the rarest and most important events in that ecosystem. And this feast or famine pattern has shaped every aspect of the giant isopod's body and behavior. Its cautious movement, its ability to remain motionless for extended periods, its capacity to go months or years without food, and its tendency to eat to the point of physical difficulty when an opportunity does appear are all direct answers to the same fundamental problem. The deep sea did not simply house this animal, it built it from the inside out. And when you look at how this animal is actually constructed, that engineering becomes very clear. The giant isopod carries one of the more impressive physical arrangements in the ocean, and nearly every feature of its body connects directly to the challenge of surviving somewhere as demanding as the deep sea floor. Start with the armor. The body is protected by a hard, calcareous exoskeleton divided into overlapping segments. The plates are rigid enough to deflect physical threats, but the segmented structure keeps the animal flexible enough to move and, when threatened, to curl into a tight, defensive ball. That posture exposes only the toughest outer surface to whatever predator or danger is approaching, while protecting all the soft tissue underneath. It is the same fundamental defense strategy used by armadillos on land, a solution that evolution arrived at independently in very different branches of the animal kingdom. Yes, the legs come next. The giant isopod has 7 pairs, 14 in total, which is a defining feature of the isopod group. The first pair are modified into specialized mouthparts that manipulate and direct food toward the 4 sets of jaws. That is not a miscount. 4 separate sets, built to tear through tough fish flesh, crack shells, and work through the dense material encountered when scavenging a large carcass. The eyes are particularly interesting given how dark the environment is. At the depths where giant isopods live, there is no functional natural light, which might suggest that eyes would be almost useless. And yet, their eyes are large, compound structures containing approximately 4,000 individual facets, each contributing to the animal's overall field of vision. A reflective layer at the back of each eye, called the tapetum lucidum, bounces any available light back through the retina a second time, maximizing detection of even the faintest bioluminescent glow from other organisms in the darkness. It is the same mechanism that makes cats' eyes appear to shine in low light. They also carry 2 pairs of antennae. One, smaller pair, handles chemical sensing, detecting the scent of food or other organisms dissolved in the surrounding water. The longer pair, which can reach roughly half the body length, handles physical navigation as the animal moves across the bottom. Perhaps the most consequential internal feature is the stomach and what surrounds it. The stomach can expand significantly relative to body size, and surrounding the digestive organs is an extensive fat body, as a dense biological reservoir of stored energy that the animal draws on between meals. Those reserves are what make the extraordinary fasting possible. But understanding exactly how they sustain the animal for so long requires a closer look at the feeding behavior itself. The giant isopod is a scavenger, which is a word that sometimes gets attached to animals as if it means they are passive, undiscriminating, or lowly. In the case of this animal, that description seriously undersells what is actually a highly effective and ecologically important survival strategy. Fish carcasses are the primary food source. A study analyzing the stomach contents of over 1,600 specimens of Bathynomus giganteus found that fish remains were the most commonly occurring item, followed by cephalopods like squid and octopus, and then various crustaceans. But the giant isopod is not limited to dead animals. There is documented evidence of individuals attacking slow-moving live prey such as sea cucumbers and sponges, and perhaps most dramatically, Footage broadcast during Shark Week in 2015 captured a giant isopod that had latched onto a dogfish shark caught in a deep water trap and was actively eating it. This is an animal that, when the opportunity presents itself, will engage with prey considerably larger than what you might expect from a creature often described purely as a bottom feeder. And then there are the whale falls. When a large marine mammal dies near the surface, its carcass eventually sinks. The journey can take days or weeks, depending on depth and ocean currents. That arrival transforms a barren stretch of ocean floor into one of the most significant food events in deep sea ecology. For organisms living in that region, it represents an enormous quantity of high-energy biomass appearing in a place where food is otherwise almost non-existent. Such giant isopods are among the first responders to a whale fall. When they reach a food source that large, they do not eat cautiously. They gorge. Research has recorded individuals consuming up to 45% of their own body weight in a single feeding event. They eat until their bodies are visibly distended. They eat until they have genuine difficulty moving. The armored plates along their sides separate slightly to accommodate the expanded stomach pushing outward from beneath. And then they stop. They may not eat again for months, or for years. That is not a behavioral quirk or an accident of captivity. It is a biological strategy so precise and so finely calibrated that a single meal, under the right metabolic conditions, can sustain the animal for a period that challenges what most of us understand about how living things work. A study from Nagasaki University calculated that a single feeding event, measured in terms of whale blubber caloric content, could theoretically sustain a closely related species for approximately 6 years. Which raises an obvious question. What is actually happening inside this animal's body during those years of silence? The answer starts with metabolism. The giant isopod has an extraordinarily low basal metabolic rate, meaning the baseline energy cost of simply being alive is very small compared to most animals of a similar size. This is partly a consequence of temperature. The near-freezing water of the deep sea slows biochemical reactions throughout the body, including every process that consumes energy. The colder the environment, the slower the metabolic engine runs, and the less fuel it requires to keep going. Beyond the basic fact of a slow metabolism, marine ecologist Taiko Kimura described giant isopods as existing in a state of semi-hibernation. This is a meaningful distinction. They are not fully dormant. They remain responsive to their environment, can move when necessary, and continue basic physiological functions. But they operate at a level of near minimal energy expenditure, running at the lowest possible setting while waiting for the next feeding opportunity to present itself. The fuel source during this extended fast is the fat body mentioned earlier, but the details of how that fat is stored matter considerably. In giant isopods, the fat body composition is heavily dominated by a type of stored fat called triacylglycerols, which release energy slowly and consistently rather than in rapid bursts. Research on Bathynomus giganteus found that this compound makes up roughly 88% of the total lipids stored in the fat body. That is an extremely high proportion, and it points to a storage system optimized specifically for long-term energy release rather than quick fuel delivery. It is the biological equivalent of a battery designed to discharge gradually over years rather than one built for a single powerful surge. Body size plays a role here as well. Larger animals, as a general biological rule, have lower metabolic rates per unit of body mass than smaller ones. This relationship, known in biology as Kleiber's rule, partly explains why a creature the size of a large cat can sustain itself on internal reserves for years, while a mouse would exhaust the same proportion of reserves in a matter of days. The giant isopod's considerable size is itself part of the survival system. What all of this adds up to is an animal whose entire physiology is oriented around waiting. It does not experience the escalating distress of hunger the way most organisms do. It holds, it conserves, and when the moment finally arrives, it responds with a ferocity that reflects exactly how long it has been biding its time. That physiological patience is well documented in research. but no single case brought it into focus for the world more vividly than a giant isopod known only as Number 1. In September of 2007, a giant isopod was caught in the Gulf of Mexico and transported to the Toba Aquarium in Mie Prefecture, Japan. It measured 29 centimeters and weighed approximately 1 kilogram. Aquarium staff named it Number 1, the first of what would eventually become a larger collection of giant isopods at the facility. For the first portion of its time at the aquarium, Number 1 behaved as expected. It ate when offered food. It moved around its tank. It did what a giant isopod does. Then, on January 2nd, 2009, something changed. Number 1 was offered a meal and ate only a small amount of it, a brief portion of horse mackerel, before its keeper, Takeya Moritaki, watched it push the food away and walk off. Moritaki noted the behavior and waited for the next feeding. Number 1 did not eat. The feeding after that produced the same result. Nothing. Moritaki tried everything he could think of. He offered different food items including squid tentacles, sori, and various fish. He adjusted the water temperature. He tried pushing food directly toward the isopod's mouth. At one point, he pressed food against the animal's face. Number 1 would sometimes move its mouth and front legs around the offered food in a way that appeared, almost deliberately, like pretending to eat. And then it would turn and walk away. Months passed. Then a full year, then 2, then 3. Word spread beyond the aquarium walls. People began showing up specifically to attend the famous non-feeding sessions, coming to observe the creature that would not eat and yet remained, by every visible measure, apparently healthy. Scientists were puzzled. One researcher after researcher noted that while giant isopods were known to tolerate extended fasting periods, no documented case had ever approached this duration. The aquarium eventually began broadcasting the feeding attempts live to online audiences, bringing in viewers from across Japan and beyond. By February 10, 2013, Number 1 had gone 1,500 days without food. International media picked up the story. On Valentine's Day, 2014, keeper Moritaki lowered a piece of mackerel into the tank as he had done countless times before. Number 1 did not move. Moritaki reached in, lifted the isopod gently, and understood immediately that it was gone. 1,868 days. 5 years and 43 days without a single meal. A dissection was performed in search of answers. The results found no blockage, no visible disease, and no obvious physical cause for the refusal. The remains were frozen for ongoing preservation and research. As of today, the full explanation has never been established. The aquarium held a live memorial broadcast online. So many people tuned in at once that the server temporarily went down. A creature that had refused every meal offered to it for over 5 years had, in death, become one of the most documented and mourned animals in the history of Japanese marine biology. And the question it left behind, of why it simply stopped eating when its body still had the means to continue, remains one of the more quietly haunting puzzles in modern marine science. The story of Number 1 is striking partly because of what it reveals and partly because of what it does not. And that is, in a sense, the whole story of the giant isopod. Fossil evidence suggests that the Bathynomus lineage has existed for at least 160 million years, placing its origins well within the age of dinosaurs. Through mass extinctions, tectonic upheavals, and ice ages, this animal continued, sustained by a physiological strategy so efficient that even now, with all the tools of modern science, we are still working to fully map how it functions. In 2022, researchers sequenced the genome of a closely related species, Bathynomus jamesi, making it the first deep-sea crustacean to have its full genetic code mapped. What they found was striking. The genome measures 5.89 gigabases, on making it the largest crustacean genome ever sequenced at the time. Much of that size comes from transposable elements, sometimes called jumping genes, which are sections of DNA capable of moving within the genome and may enable rapid adaptation under environmental stress. Scientists believe this genetic flexibility may be part of what makes these animals so resilient across geological timescales. Despite everything we have learned, the gaps in our knowledge remain large. We do not fully know how long giant isopods live in the wild, though estimates suggest potentially 20 or more years. We do not fully understand their reproductive timing or the precise conditions that trigger breeding cycles. We have very limited data on wild population sizes because deep-sea sampling requires expensive submersibles and specialized equipment that relatively few research programs have consistent access to. Miranda Lowe, principal curator of crustacea at the Natural History Museum in London, described the situation plainly. There are not many researchers formulating dedicated studies around giant isopods, and there are still a great many unanswered questions. An animal that has outlasted dinosaurs, that stores enough energy to go years without eating, that carries the largest sequenced crustacean genome ever recorded, and that became an international phenomenon by quietly refusing every meal offered to it for half a decade, is still, in many genuinely meaningful ways, a mystery. The ocean floor where it lives remains among the least explored environments on Earth, and every time researchers look more closely, they find something the previous survey missed. That is not a failure of science, that is an invitation. If this video showed you something you did not know before, drop it in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you want more videos about the animals the ocean keeps trying to hide from us, subscribing is the best way to make sure you do not miss the next one.